Welcome to the first episode of Market Mavericks, the latest series from the collaborative canvas. I'm your host, Ankesh Saxena, and I'm thrilled to have you join us on this journey where we deep dive into the most pressing issues and emerging trends in the world of B2B survey data collection, consumer insights, and market research. In this series, we are bringing together industry experts, thought leaders, and innovators to tackle the challenges that keep us all on our toes. From dynamic pricing algorithms to the risk of competitive pricing and even the use of game theory to analyze pricing strategies, we'll all be exploring it all here. Today, we are kicking things off with a highly relevant topic. Who really drives B2B sample prices? We look at the factors influencing pricing decisions, the impact on client relationship, and how to balance competitiveness with quality services. But before we dive into this discussion, I'm honored to introduce our three distinguished guests who brings a wealth of knowledge and experience to the table. Our first guest is Ann Hunter. She's the SVP of B2B Products and go-to-market for Ipsos North America, where she also heads up Xperity, a recent Ipsos acquisition in the B2B space, and has decade of market research and advertising research experience, holding senior roles at companies such as Kantar, Disco, Comscore, and AOL. She has been named a great mind by the ARF, a research trendsetter by Synopsys, and has won several B2B marketing awards from organizations such as the ANA, and has also served as a chief strategy officer representative to the World Economic Forum. And we welcome you onto the show, which is the first of its kind, and we talk about soon on the topic.
Thank you.
Next, we have Michael Collins, former co-CEO of expert network Zintro. Michael has served agencies and consultancies with B2B qualitative research in the US. Welcome, Michael.
Thank you, Ankesh.
And finally, joining us is Andrew Jones. Andrew is the SVP of Global Supply and User Acquisition at Cint, responsible for new supplier acquisitions and existing partner success. He has had several roles throughout his decade-long tenure at Cint on both the buyer client and the supplier side. Welcome, Andrew.
Thanks, Ankesh. Happy to be here.
Thank you so much for joining us on the show, and it's such an honor to have you all together onto this forum. And I know it's pretty early for you guys, so my first thanks again to this. With such a diverse and knowledgeable panel, today's discussion promises to be both enlightening and engaging. So without further ado, let's dive into the conversation and explore who truly drives B2B sample prices. Guys, I have the first question, and this is something that, I have seen myself while talking to a lot of many clients here in Southeast Asia and India. And the main challenge is, the risk of competitive pricing in the B2B research. And considering that we have different players, we have marketplaces, we have, SME players as well. I probably asked this question to Andrew Jones first. What are the biggest challenges that you face in maintaining these competitive pricing while ensuring the quality of your sample running into the marketplace?
Yeah, I would say for us, it is a big challenge, right? We are a marketplace and our commercial model is reverse auction, meaning the buyer dictates the price. So when we talk about B2B, that can pose an issue, right? And a lot of times this is done either programmatically or fully DIY, where buyers are coming in. They can put in a $2 CPI and look for a CEO, and then get mad when the quality isn't up to par. So that's the issue that we're dealing with currently, and kind of what we're doing to try to counter that is look to do some more product related initiatives to kind of counter this. So whether it be kind of gatekeeping some of the profiling and have that as a separate kind of commercial model, whereas more as an auction based where suppliers are dictating the price. Also things like dynamic pricing based on, dynamic profiles. So someone comes in, they target a certain profile, we're going to tell them what the price is. And then also two things like minimum CPI some of the things we're looking at, but it is very difficult. And I would say for Cint, it's also an education to the market. I think traditionally people think of us as a consumer shop, and we are. However, we do have a lot of access to premium expert networks, verified suppliers that we have partnered with, that we have access to in a managed service, non-programmatic way. And that's really what we're going to try to build off of until some of the platform solutions are ready in the future that can kind of answer some of these issues. But it's a problem that we've been dealing with, I mean, for years, really. But as we're making a bigger push now into B2B, figuring out the correct commercial model that leads to, client success and then obviously quality as well is extremely important for us.
Yeah, I think for marketplaces, quality is paramount, and that is what they majorly focus on, which is why I think keeping B2B aside as not a panel that you wanted to push into the marketplace. But when it comes to, and you mentioned, the buyer decides the price on the reverse auction model. So let me ask Anne, I mean, as a buyer, Anne, what are your risks? What do you see as a competitive pricing in the B2B research, and how do you also ensure quality on that front?
So we start with quality as opposed to price. So initially, we're going to look at supply and vet every supplier based on how they actually interact with the humans who are actually going to be taking the survey. And if that quality involves really individually verifying them, if that quality involves ensuring that they are getting incentives that are commensurate with their level, if it includes technical checks, then we could consider them and then even think about pricing. But after that, we're going to do more tests. We're going to try them out. We're going to grade them. We're going to look at the amount of fraud or low quality responses that are in the sample that we're getting. And then we can assess prices. It's very different than B2C, where there is a lot of commodity and volume. In B2B, the level of quality is really across the board. There's B2B sample out there that is the level of, fast food, and there's B2B sample out there that's the level of a Michelin 5-star restaurant. And until you actually do the testing on the individual data that you're getting, you don't know. And so you're going to pay very different prices in the same way that we pay different prices when we go out to eat because of the quality of the food. B2B is a lot more like that than anything else. So pricing is really entirely dependent on quality. And the first thing you have to do in order to set an appropriate price is to look at how the respondents are actually being acquired, vetted, and delivered. And then when you understand that level of quality and have tested it, you can start appropriately and relatively pricing.
Yeah, I think B2B is, of course, we cannot compare that with the B2C, but considering and probably a question for Michael, because as a researcher standpoint, Michael, what do you see your challenges are? I remember a few cases which I want to talk about, because you also work for the expert interview where you recruit them specifically, and there have been cases where people have been recruited offline and people have been recruited online. For you, what matters the most? And then where does this pricing matrix come along in the play?
Yeah, I think one of the challenges with the recruitment process is that a lot of the information is self-reported. The respondent, the participant, they're, of course, answering the screener to demonstrate their relevant experience. And there isn't too much that is done or maybe can be done to validate those positions. And I think that correlates with price, the ability to validate and to understand who the perspective is. I think there are trade-offs. There is a correlation between price and quality, where the ability to understand whether or not they really have that level of seniority, that company of interest to a potential study. I think that there are limits to it. So good, fast, and cheap. That popular expression, pick two. I think price correlates with quality, and there are trade-offs, but it's never going to be perfect. You can have a lower cost sample that is still quality, but it's very difficult.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I agree. But and again, and mentioned that we take immense efforts to identify whether it is the right quality sample or not. Price comes later. But do you also see, when you identify the right resources, do you see the cost fluctuation? Because, you guys define the budget of your project. So do you see those B2B sample purchases that you do? Are there any flexibility that you see in the prices?
Yeah, there's flexibility. Negotiation happens on a lot of these individual quote processes. These are ad hoc projects, so yeah, it's largely driven by the incidence rate, the feasibility, the level of involvement. But yeah, there's wiggle room, and best practice is to have multiple suppliers that you can contrast those bids against and benchmark the pricing that you receive from suppliers over time, so that you understand sort of what is the norms for a price point for a given level of involvement and target perspective.
And what's your take on this? Because you guys actually deal with a lot of suppliers in the same arena.
Yeah, it's the same thing. We always think about having a healthy blend of suppliers on a given project so that whether it's a feasibility issue or a quality issue, we can tweak as we go to ensure we maintain that quality for the client. I agree completely with Michael here. One of the things that is really important is that validation. So we have implemented a technology called VEP, which is validation, enrichment, placement of professionals. It's designed for B2B that addresses some of the challenges with self-reported data in B2B. If the survey is poorly designed and the question is, are you a technology decision maker? And some person who's the college student, trying to make a couple bucks says, yeah, I'm a technology decision maker. The results are going to be crummy. So we're putting VEP into B2B studies where it makes sense so that we can have a larger blend of sample suppliers so that VEP is within the study, validating the knowledge of that person in a way that only that person with that level of seniority and with that level of experience would actually be able to answer. And that way we can tell if this person really is the expert that they claim to be. And it's a technology we launched a year ago. It's been rolling out with some of the bigger brands using it, but it's helping address that issue. When you have that, it's really easy then to compare prices because you do have the same level of quality across different suppliers. And over time, if you have a supplier that's doing a great job and consistently giving quality, there's opportunities to build longer term relationships. I think that's an important part of being successful is having long-term relationships with the best suppliers so that you're getting preferential pricing and access to those respondents. And when you can provide data that actually shows quality levels, you can have the positive discussion. Hey, we love what you're doing. We want to be one of your, we want you to be a preferred supplier. We want to get preferred rates from you. In exchange, we're because you do a great job. And you can have the negative conversations. We're looking at VEP. You're not making the cut with the stuff you're sending over. You're just not worth what the other suppliers are worth.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a continuous effort to identify who's delivering, at a best of their capabilities. And then having a long-term association is always, people wanted to get associated with companies like Ipsos, of course. Technology is something which is also taking a play into this. And you mentioned, you have a technology in place. Andrew, Cint is investing a lot into the technology as well. Where do you guys, see this cost fluctuation? Does it part of it? Your conversations with partners or the clients at certain point of time, or because buyers do the thing that
Absolutely. In B2B, again, we try to take off the platform where we're kind of doing it more old school managed service where we're sending a bid back and forth. And that way we can kind of protect the pricing a little bit. But really echoing what Ann said, I think tech plays a huge role here, especially when you can theoretically expand your supplier base if you're using things like maybe LinkedIn validation or even AI tools that can verify answers that maybe only an IT decision maker would know. Things like this that you could tack on to a supplier that maybe isn't grade A, but is maybe grade B, but you throw on some tech on there, and now you can go to market with a, a verified B2B sample solution. And another thing that we're looking at too, outside of the tech play, is just the data piece as well. And we're pulling this from kind of like our existing B2C suppliers. But let's take, for example, like a fintech app. If we onboard a company like this to take surveys, but they also have their banking information, maybe some ID upload, maybe some information about their job, they can share that with us. And we now know that this panelist, even though it came in as consumer, is a decision maker, HR, whatever it is, because we have real behavioral data. So that's where the line is kind of blurred a little bit between kind of the self-reported and actually kind of the real behavioral data. That's something that we're looking in as well to kind of merge all that together.
That's something that I got to know just now. But one more question out of the blue, Andrew.
Mhm.
When I speak with a lot of Indian, brands,
Mhm.
they don't seem to be aligning with how the B2B is recruited. Because even, when it comes to B2C, and Anne gave a very great example that, if you're looking for somebody like a decision maker role and or technology DM, a student maybe, knocking that survey off and saying that,
Yeah.
I am, but they may not be. And similarly, within India, when we talk about behavioral data, and I'm kind of an advocate to it, because when I see a behavioral data, I can exactly say that, this B2C person is also a B2B person,
Right.
and we can definitely use them. How does a marketplace segregates that? And how do you guys actually segregate that?
Yeah. Well, right now it's in the platform as, any regular qualification. So we answer questions about their work and, hey, I work at a company that has 500 people. We make X amount of money, this role. But really, if we have the data on that person as well, again, kind of going back to that gatekeeping, it needs to be separated from the general kind of consumer sample. Even though it is consumer sample, it's verified. So it's more of a premium consumer, and that should be, priced accordingly. And I think different access points. So maybe there's a different commercial model for the buyers to have access to this as opposed to just the regular consumer marketplace. Again, maybe the commercials are different where the suppliers that are feeding into it are telling us the price versus our buyers doing so. So I think we do have to separate it out, but we'll have it all coming from the same ecosystem. So we're starting from a better place because we have all this data and all these panelists already. If we can use a technology that we can identify 20% of them are B2B, that's powerful because we already have partnerships with said companies as opposed to starting something fresh with someone in the industry.
Yeah.
One of the things we find in that is it is tricky with B2C sample to pull out B2B, because if you're really a CFO at a tech firm and you're taking surveys for consumer purposes, you're just not a very good CFO. Like, you should be definitely doing other things with your time. You're definitely, not either doing your job, or you're not really that CFO. So we often find that when we're looking at higher level roles, those, director level and up roles, if they're also hanging out on consumer panels and taking consumer surveys, they probably aren't who they are claiming to be, because it doesn't make sense on an hourly basis for their time to be taking consumer surveys to earn, a few bucks here or there. For other B2B roles, though, some of the more blue collar roles, they absolutely can be found in the consumer panels, well. We just ran a study targeting people who run dog breeding, who are certified kennel breeders, and they can be found in B2C audiences. Plumbers, teachers, we find more of that is a good fit. So part of it is really understanding, are you looking for executives? Are you looking for decision makers? They're probably not really in consumer panels, but if you're looking for blue collar B2B, you may find them there, and that's a great way to access them at a reasonable cost. So it's really a matter of also understanding when to use each type of supply and expert network may be better. It is better often for the C-suite, but for other audiences, pricing can be helped by the fact that some of them are in consumer panels.
Yeah,
I was
I would
about,
agree.
yeah, I was about to go to Michael to the fact that, when it comes to C-suite, I think expert panel probably, Michael, you can advocate that, right?
Yeah, what I appreciate about Anne's answer is I think it's rooted in first principles. It's sort of the fundamental common sense approach. So even though quant sample is complicated, there's a complex, supply chain of stitched together various panels to reach the scale of completes that you need. Coming at it at least at first with some common sense and expecting some natural constraints to these things, right? Like the CFO in a consumer panel, they're probably minimum wage earnings extrapolated out over an hourly basis. So it just defies common sense that those things happen. Maybe there's some edge cases, but yeah, I think it's important for customers, even if they feel intimidated by the procurement process for sample, to at least start with some of those basic, realities, and then they can ask questions and take an interest in the process so that they're asking questions, learning about it. Another thing about technology that we talked about, it can sometimes be window dressing. There's a concern among agencies that somebody might have XYZ 3000 tech solution, but is it being used for this particular project? Is it being used for all of the sample? Is it being used for the other vendors that are being subcontracted to reach that full level of completes? So yeah, taking an interest in the process, being curious, asking questions, diversifying, monitoring results, all of these basic things I think are just as important as the technology.
Andrew, you were saying something?
I was just going to follow up on Anne's point. I 100% agree. I just wanted to note that some of the suppliers that we're bringing on the B2C space where we're pulling some of these, they're not traditional panels where I think it's different. So it's a company like a financial app where they're using surveys as a way to just drive traffic and user engagement to the app. So that I wouldn't say they're experienced survey takers. That's the only difference. Otherwise, I would 100% agree with everything you said.
Yeah, I think even I agree to that. And one quick question, because when I remember my good old days with my earlier organization, when we used to actually get ourselves vet to Ipsos, there's a very stringent process about, identifying B2C from B2B from B2C. And you just, gave a couple of examples there. And now I'm taking a fintech example as well. That's again, part of I buy insurance. I may be working as a, banker in one of the organization. Let's not take C-suite because we already clarified that, C-suites are predominantly not a panel kind of a thing. It is whosoever actually claims, then even I agree that they don't have panels there. But how do you then identify that? One is definitely a B2C and then working as a banker.
Sure. So for that middle ground, the early career person who might be working in an environment where they are the business person with some influence in the decision. Maybe they're not the ultimate decision maker, or they're the user of a product and a company wants to research them to understand how they're feeling, but maybe they're still relatively, lower income. They're just coming into it. And you want to make sure that they really are doing the work that they're doing, but recognize that they might be available in more sources than just expert networks. You may find them in consumer panels. That's where something like what we're doing with VEP comes in. So by putting the validation on top of all the different suppliers, and each supplier hopefully is doing their own validation process as well, but by putting that on the top of that, we are able to then see what comes out that is actually from different types of sources that really does meet that client need for the insights that they're trying to deliver. And that comes through some technical review. So we can look at this sort of telemetry within the study, the behavior of the survey taker, as well as this set of questions that are designed to assess the real understanding of the topic by the survey taker that can validate that they are who they say they are. They really are that level. And even if that is a mid or junior level in the workforce. And by putting that across everything, it just provides a consistency in the reporting so that no matter where the sample's coming from, these people really are who they say they are. And you can get sample from a variety of different sources in that manner.
Okay. This makes sense. Again, with the fact that, what Andrew mentioned about behavioral science, you're also capturing the moments of every individual to assess whether you're getting the right source of sample or not. And then accordingly, you move on to the prices, which you initially mentioned. All right. So, and again, I'll go back to the fact that, you sort out your own sources and you find out the right elements of recruitment. And you also mentioned, when it comes to a long-term contract, pricing definitely matters a lot. I was reading an article a couple of weeks back, and in certain cases, not necessarily market research, but there's an element of dynamic pricing. And I think Andrew would, also agree to this, that marketplaces definitely have a dynamic pricing model when it comes to B2C. What's your take on that? I mean, as a buyer, do you think a dynamic pricing algorithm in B2B surveys makes sense?
There is some degree of supply and demand, but the larger challenge tends to be the level of complexity and variety in B2B surveys. So there is dynamism, but it tends to be based on the standard things that you'd see in consumer, length of the survey. But things like incidence rate, which are really, really tricky to assess in B2B, where nobody exactly knows how many people are using a particular software that you might be trying to research. And so that's what the research is trying to find out. And so there's dynamism in the pricing based on the level of specificity, the level of role, the level of knowledge, market. I think those tend to be more common than what you can do in B2C with some kind of more methodological approaches, because a 18 to 49-year-old male is an 18 to 49-year-old male, and you know what you're trying to reach. It's just a very additionally complex market to build in all the variations that different clients are looking for when they're trying to research B2B.
That's a very good point, because IR conversations are never ending conversations. When it comes to B2B, a lot of people would probably stick to say that, I can do X, Y, Z and at a 30% IR, but it doesn't last that way. So, when you actually get into the market, and when it comes to, measuring the IR, Andrew, probably, for you guys have been managing the marketplaces by large, and you've been seeing the behavioral data. Do you counter that IR thing through that behavioral data, and then you think that, probably dynamic pricing should work? We should have an algorithm around it.
Well, we don't do that yet. Definitely not. That'd be nice to get to somewhere like that. But and again, kind of agreeing with Anne here, it's very difficult, I think, to do this for B2B, and also to if we're mixing different modes, right? If we're doing online, maybe we need to add some caddy in there, depending on how niche the target is. I think it's very difficult to have kind of like a standard pricing algorithm. And also, too, the way we procure the sample, we're not integrated into a marketplace yet. If we're talking about true kind of verified B2B, we're still kind of old school, sending out bids, managed service. And in that regard, it's almost impossible to have some sort of dynamic pricing because we're not in control of that. I will say to the B2C portion, we do obviously use dynamic pricing. We have our reach tool that will dictate price based on the type of the target audience, IR, LOI, all that stuff, but also other things like seasonality, supply and demand in the marketplace. There's times Q4 that it's really tough to get sample in some instances. So that'll drive pricing up. Other times in the summer where there's excess supply, price goes down. So those are some of the things we put in there. And also too, the objectives of the business. Are we going to optimize for delivery, or does the company want to optimize for margin and revenue? So there's going to be different rules that they're going to put in. So I don't think actually, at least not at the current state, the dynamic pricing algorithm kind of works for B2B, in my opinion.
Okay. Michael, for expert interviews and expert network, dynamic pricing definitely doesn't have, a place to talk about. But Andrew made a point about how, online and a catty get mixed up. And that's what I talked about this with you initially, that, when you actually recruit a sample, bases all the seasonality, bases all the permutations and combinations, and bases all the sources that you evaluate, do you still believe that, freezing a price and not keeping it dynamic would make sense? Or there's always, a debate on that?
Yeah, I think certainly for an expert network, there's like an adverse selection thing where if people are coming to an expert network, it's for a hard to reach audience in most cases. Therefore, they're not getting it from a traditional source. So you're already anticipating complexity, some unknowns about the targeting, the screening, the incidence rate. So yeah, I think there is, the simplicity and predictability is great for clients to have standard pricing, and expert networks generally operate on that. Prepaid retainers, subscriptions, rebate programs, credit systems. But yeah, there are a lot of variables to be considered. Again, the main ones: level of involvement, how the incidence rate of the particular audience, and sometimes the sensitivity of the topic. If it's B2B, there might be considerations around competitive intelligence, market intel, the NDAs and non-competes of the folks that you're engaging for these conversations. So all those sensitivities and complexities, understanding that in the pricing, it's going to change. And so yeah, predictability, simplicity is nice, but clients understand the variability, especially if you're able to articulate what it is about their project that is having an effect on the pricing, and maybe they're able to change that.
Okay. And when it comes to actually doing a mix mode, within the same project, you still think that, this pricing should have a variety to it rather than just being fixing it or not so dynamic?
There are opportunities to simplify or put things into buckets, but there is going to be dynamism. There's going to be dynamism primarily by role. The biggest variant here is role. The higher up the level you get, the more people value their time. And so that's going to come into play. And then there's some variety when it comes to region, but you can create buckets and create relationships with suppliers that can deliver consistently high quality supply so that you can have predictability to say, okay, whenever we're going to target this particular level, we're going to be in this range, or maybe even have a specific number so that both sides know reasonably what you're going to be delivering. And that does make things easier. But on the back end, and really in the supplier's realm, so I'd leave this to Andrew and Michael, I know there's a lot more to it, in that individuals themselves are going to expect different remuneration for their time. When working with, market research company like us, we are able to work with the best suppliers and set some of those standard rates to add consistency so that our clients can get a consistent approach across multiple underlying suppliers.
One quick open question here in that case, and probably, all three of you can answer that. When you actually go after, onboarding a supplier, they come up with a very promising panel book and elements around their panels. When it comes to pricing, they have to win the race and they give you the best price that they think. But again, let's not even talk about the top line pricing there, but they give your own pricing and you use them. You like their pricing, you use them, and they under deliver. Does the price optimize what they actually meant? Or is it you actually believe that their panel is just, what they said is not, and they're just trying to, get into the books of, bigger clients like Ipsos or Zintro, or for that matter, Cint? What's your take on this?
I'll just say generally, there's a lack of visibility into the supplier process. So you do unfortunately have to take a lot at the word of those initial conversations and vetting. So you have the panel book, you have collateral on their supposed process. And of course, yeah, reputation, referrals, testimonials, case studies, those things are all very important in the procurement process. But all in all, you still don't have an internal view into who they're subcontracting or partnering with to reach the full level of sample. You can try and dictate those things in your terms, in your contract with that client, with that supplier. But yeah, a lot of it is monitoring, and suppliers are, often viewed as good as their last project. So you may have a supplier that does really well in the last 3 projects, and then all of a sudden something blows up and your client's upset about the most recent delivery. That may be that they used a different subcontractor, and you're seeing the variable quality, or it was an audience that they weren't well suited to. So just a few examples.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And sorry, Andrew, go ahead.
Go ahead,
Go ahead.
Andrew.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think it's important also in those instances, and I've been burned many a times here, is to not put all your eggs in one basket when you have a new partner that you're trying to test out, especially if it happens to be the cheapest option. Because if you're in field, they underdeliver, they charge you 30, and you can't get it, can't get it filled for less than 50 from anywhere else. You're in trouble. So that's a position you never want to be in. Unfortunately, I've been in many times, but you learn from that. So when you send these bids out, and I liked your quick serve food analysis. We use like a grade of beef. You either get your ground beef or your filet mignon. You throw some bids, you get some ground beef bids out there in case this medium level supplier who we think is medium level comes in, under delivers. And then afterwards, it's important to find out why. Was it because of price? Or Ankesh, to your point, is it because maybe that's just all they can do and the price doesn't really matter? Those are some things that you kind of learn over time as a relationship grows. But I would just say, yeah, make sure you have multiple options in this scenario when we're brokering B2B.
Yeah, Andrew, that right on. You definitely want to be looking at blends, consistency of blends, but you can't just throw stuff onto a project with a new vendor.
Mm-hmm.
We do an RFP process. We do initial testing. You can't get on our projects unless we're testing you in advance and trying it out, and then we'll know the relative quality for the moment. And I thought what you said about, it's always about your last project made a lot of sense, because there's another element that's come into play in the past year that's really thrown this all a little bit a curveball, and something that, again, we're having to invest in a lot in technology in order to maintain that sort of last guard to quality, and that is AI.
Yeah.
Starting a year or two ago, prior to the wide use of AI, particularly by individuals, if you're running a B2B survey and you're asking about really technical things related to someone's job, it's pretty hard for somebody to fake that. You have an open end, they can't give you a good answer. They could Google something, copy and paste it in, but then it becomes really obvious because you Google the same thing, check it, and see, oh yeah, that's where they copy pasted it from. It's pretty easy to catch those. With AI, we now have the challenge that people can, who are not qualified, put in an open-ended question and get a pretty nice answer. Doesn't have spelling mistakes. It looks pretty legit. And if somebody else, let's say they've got a whole big room full of fraudsters, just hammering these out, they'll put it in and they'll get a slightly different answer, but it'll also be really good. So now it's hard to look for patterns. And we do look for those patterns and use multiple levels of AI in order to do that with Ipsos Facto, which is our AI solution. But it has changed the reliability of partners, of suppliers, because we have suppliers we've worked with, they're great, we've had great reliability. But if a link or links to the survey get picked up by one of these kind of fraud houses, you can all of a sudden with AI get a lot of fraud from a really good supplier kind of suddenly, and they get kind of hit what I think of as like fraud attacks. And so the supply can be contaminated even with great suppliers. And that's why that blend is really important, because if you do see that with one supplier and you've got several others on the program, you can adjust to ensure you can take them out and not delay the project. You're going to hit full feasibility because you have alternatives on the plan. So blending really helps that. But it again goes to the need to have an overlay across all suppliers that provides some consistency of quality so that you can be monitoring in field. But it's relatively new. It's been hard for fraudsters to get into B2B studies in the past because of the technical nature of the questions. Today, it's much easier. And so there's a much higher incentive for fraudsters to really attack this space. And having a uniform approach across every supplier and ensuring that there's multiple suppliers in every project is really good way to prevent those attacks from impacting the research.
Yeah, I just want to
Again,
add to that.
yeah.
I agree that I think that we may underestimate the level of sophistication of respondents and participants. With B2B, because it's nuanced topics, we think that they wouldn't be able to get through that process. I agree with ChatGPT and a bunch of other things. It's much easier, especially when it's asynchronous, right? In a live discussion like this, it's harder to have the help along the way. In an online survey, although those things are timed and measured, there's a little bit more of a luxury of being able to craft an answer and to be thoughtful about your approach. And respondents know that it's in their interest to give useful answers. So yeah, even another example is moderators most moderators are generalists, right? They're not industry specific. They don't know the topics that they're facilitating conversations on. In the same way that respondents and participants taking a B2B study, it may not be as difficult as we think. So that's not necessarily a hedge against bad data.
That's where that layered approach, looking at technical cues from the telemetry, looking at behavioral cues from how the survey is taken, and then looking at their ability to answer specific questions that are designed in a way that it's not going to be answerable by ChatGPT. Adding that layered approach consistently is what is allowing us to catch this stuff. And then we can go back to the supplier and say, hey, you're a great supplier. We love working with you. You got attacked by some fraud. Here you go. Here's the respondents. Here's how we caught it. And what can we do about this? How can you fix it? How can we help you?
So, Andrew, can you answer that question? Because again, this is very crucial, considering at a marketplace, when people actually reach out to say Ipsos, they say they have the panels, and they probably be using Cint marketplaces by just changing some screeners here and there and making it more like, look like a B2B respondent, and then minus the technical part of it. And eventually they have been attacked by bots. So the question lies on, marketplaces that, they have been severely taken by the bots, and you clean them up because these are B2C customers, consumers, and they're getting into as B2B. How do you manage that? And how do you go back to your client saying that, this is what has been fixed and this was the reason? You're on mute.
Sorry. Yeah, we had a huge issue, as most of the industry did, I think January of 22, if I'm not mistaken, somewhere around there. Huge issue on the marketplace, what we call ghost completes, a lot of bot activity. It was not just B2B, it was kind of platform wide, but where we saw, I guess, probably the biggest issue is that people that were running B2B on our platform, and not with verified B2B partners, just with the general consumer at probably $5, were throwing away 50, 60, in some cases 70% of the data during that time. And that, there's a lot of reasons for that. I talked earlier about that we shouldn't necessarily be doing B2B at reverse auction with the current setup now, but what we did to answer that is we developed our own proprietary solution. It's called Trust Score. It's a machine learning algorithm that really takes kind of past and kind of future assessments of a panelist before they enter the survey. We've got our platform rec rate down to single digits. I think we're right around 6-7% right now. And at that time in 2022, there was months 20-30%, if I'm not mistaken. So we've done a ton of work here, more to be done, and it's something that we're always tweaking, because in some cases the suppliers that are really good and have their own security systems, they might not like this because they think there's a higher level of false positives, and we're not getting the delivery that we used to get from them because maybe 5% of their supply is getting booted for a score that we came up with. So it's something that kind of always needs to be tweaked, and the inputs always need to be changed. But we've done a great job, I think, collectively on the platform, kind of reducing fraud. I think with B2B specifically, especially if we're talking outside the platform and managed service type workflow, there's other things that we need to take in to consideration because we're not running it on the platform. So there's other third parties that we would use that could potentially do something very similar. I know Sentry, the cloud solution has something very similar to this. So those are the things that we're looking at, but platform wide, yeah, the trust score made a huge difference.
And since considering the kind of elements that you've been seeing across the marketplaces, and probably this is something for both Andrew and Anne can answer. Since when you actually identify right kind of a supplier, you work with them for, say, 5 to 10 projects, you onboard them as a final supplier, and now their quality scores are good and you get into a contract mode. Do you benchmark the prices, what they actually give it to you, throughout their tenure with you, or you benchmark their prices across the board? Say, for example, Ipsos works on similar studies with multiple suppliers. Do you apply that game theory analysis on pricing benchmarking and then go back to the supplier and say that this is what the prices we are expecting?
Yeah, you I wouldn't say it's as sophisticated as game theory, but yeah, absolutely. So you look and say, here's the quality that you are able to deliver. Here's the accuracy of your forecast. Sometimes people give great quality and they always over promise. To take that into account, because halfway through the study you're going to have to spend time going to find someone else. So you're like, well, you're not quite as worth as much because you can't give accurate information. So you take those factors into account and then compare that to what other supply is available. And that does help you then decide how much is that worth. And oftentimes it's a pretty open conversation. You want to build long-term relationships with the best suppliers. And so letting them know where they're doing well and where they're not. Maybe it is a feasibility issue. We actually want to work with our suppliers to help them give us better supply. So we find that talking really openly about what's going on, what we're seeing, helps them get better supply, which helps us have more suppliers so we can offer reasonable rates to our clients. It's really half of B2B market research is extremely human, and half of it needs to be very technical.
Yeah.
And the secret to being successful is knowing when to use each approach.
Yeah, I would agree. And I think, again, we're not doing game theory here either, but what we are doing is kind of just standard sales practices. So we're understanding who our buyer is, what their budget is, what their target, what they're looking for, and who else they're reaching out to, the Ipsos data. And based on that, I know the level of service we need to provide, the price we need to be competitive, because sometimes if we come in too low, that's a big red flag. But if we come in kind of at the middle, we got to make sure we can back it up with the quality as well. So understanding the subsources that we're brokering and getting, on our platform to deliver to the end client, we need to make sure it's quality. But at the same time, knowing the prices and the whole landscape, I think is really important. And but again, that's just kind of just sales 101, really, just understanding who our buyers and who our competitors are.
Yeah, true. And Michael, when it comes to expert interviews and expert networks, as a call researcher, you probably be dealing with a lot of suppliers in that case, and some may give you, extremely high prices, some give you moderate prices. Do you also do this kind of a comparison every time and then freeze a supplier for a longer, relation or a contract? How do you manage it? I think game theory definitely not be implying into you as well, because you don't compare too often, as in what marketplaces or Ipsos does when it comes to larger projects.
Yeah, like Andrew mentioned, I think it's shaped a lot by who your client is and what the alternatives are, what the market. So if you're familiar with what the other sources cost, some of it's sort of relationship based. If it's a new client, it may be sort of a loss leader project where you're motivated to win this and to deliver and figure out the margins later. So you can be strategic about the pricing, but yeah, generally in qual, there's a little bit more transparency and context around the participant. There's a little bit more information to work with around who the participant is. So you can apply some price pressure, in my opinion, because there are ways to validate who you're speaking with. So there is a lot of commoditized pressure on expert networks. There's over 100 of them. So even though the prices are pretty predictable, they're in the, pretty standard range. There's I think it's less complex than quant, so you can really, politely negotiate and understand what the trade-offs are.
So, who exactly decides the price? The client or a buyer or a seller, or is it a situation?
Well, I think there's instances where we're all three, but I think if we're looking for good quality, I think ultimately the end supplier. So maybe not necessarily the marketplace, but the subsource, the actual B2B supplier should be dictating the price. And then of course too, we got to fit that in to clients' budget. So there's, finagling along the way, but that's where I think it differs from B2C, specifically, with reverse auction that we have here at Cint. So that would be, my preference.
And very often it's the respondent. The respondent says, if they are high quality, this is what my time is worth. And so we start there. Okay, is this appropriate for the level that we're trying to reach and how much their time is worth in order to give us really great answers that help provide insights? And then who found the respondent and how much money do they need to make? And then how do we deliver that survey and how much does a company that's doing market research need? But in B2B, there's a wide range between the cost of someone who's a school teacher and someone who's a CEO. So the pricing really starts with the respondent, and then you negotiate above that based on the level of quality that the supplier can bring to the table.
Beautiful.
Yeah, that's definitely the approach with expert networks, that the expert networks expect to make a certain multiple of what the expert's honorarium or incentive is. So you're operating off that. Yeah, more generally, it's the market. Clients have a lot of leverage. So if there are multiple layers of vendors and suppliers delivering on a study, each is sort of beholden to some extent to the vendor above them and ultimately to the sponsor of the research. So yeah, with competitive pressures, I think that sort of is one of the larger forces on quality. Of course, striking the balance between quality and the competitive and price pressure. So difficult balance.
Yeah.
Often educating clients helps a lot too. Educating the
Totally.
end clients to understand the value of paying for good quality helps alleviate some of the pricing pressure so that we're actually able to deliver good quality to them. And that's a whole nother aspect of the research that I think there's opportunity for in B2B.
Yeah, that's very well said, Anne. I mean, I think that's exactly what people should understand. There are two elements to it. One is definitely respondent, and secondly, educating the client as well. Because at the end, point of time, there's a lot of investment in retaining these, respondents. They're not B2C kind of audience. This is definitely B2B. True. Thank you so much, guys. And ladies and gentlemen, that's the wrap up on our inaugural episode of Market Mavericks here at Collaborative Canvas. A huge thank you to our distinguished guests, Anne, Andrew, and Michael, for sharing their invaluable insights on the complex topics of B2B sample pricing. And we just not only discuss the pricing, but I think we deep dive into larger aspect of the B2B sample, whether it is coming from the marketplace or expert interviews, or by large, how we see the behavioral signs around it. We have explored dynamic pricing algorithm, the challenges of the competitive pricing, and the application of whether a game theory should be part of the pricing strategies or not. Each perspective has shed light on how these factors influence the industry and how we can navigate these challenges effectively. I hope you have found this discussion as enlightening as engaging I have. And if you have really enjoyed today's episode, then don't forget to subscribe to our podcast and stay tuned for more episodes of Market Mavericks, where we continue to tackle the critical issues and emerging trends in B2B research. Feel free to connect with us on YouTube, LinkedIn, and Instagram for updates and additional content and behind the scenes insights. Your feedback and suggestions are always welcome. So please share your thoughts and let us know what topics you like to cover next. Thank you for joining us. And as we look forward to bringing the more thoughtful, provoking discussion in the next episode, until then, stay curious and stay innovating. Thank you so much.